All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm sorry for the short delay. We had a few technical difficulties, which I hope have been solved. But welcome to the Monday, May 4th, 2020 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. Today is a work session, and we are delighted to have you all here with us. Just as a reminder to my colleagues on council, if you could mute your computers unless you're speaking, that may avoid any echoing that we've had in some of our past meetings. But welcome to you all. Thank you. You may notice that some of us are wearing Better Together t-shirts. I've got one on right now. And so we wanted to celebrate these shirts and what they stand for and the good work that's being done in our communities right now. These were the idea of Adina Williams and Suzanne Huladki, and they have really caught on here in Falls Church. I think as of a week or two ago, there were 1,300 shirts that have been sold. I imagine that's more like 2,000 these days. $17,000 contributed to the schools as of maybe a week or so ago. 140 families helped. Meals for the police department are coming soon, and also help for local businesses. So with gift cards that are being distributed to needy families. So just another example, a lot of the great things happening here in the city. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or additional information about the program, but just one of the many examples of great things of our community pulling together in really, really nice ways. So our hats off to all the folks involved in this very good program. Does anyone else have any information about that they'd like to share, or any other stories? We are trying to support our local businesses as well, and Letty Hardy, who I think was instrumental in our a proclamation that went out recently, but we certainly would encourage all our residents to do all they can to support our local businesses, which, like many people now, are feeling the pinch of this difficult time. And when things open up even more, I think it'll be even more important that we get out and patronize our restaurants and other local businesses. So, but anyway, a lot of good things happening right now. Our community is really pulling together. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share, or should we just move on to the business on the agenda?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Can we have everybody identify that they're attending the meeting? I think all of the council members are here, but it would be great for the record to just have them identify themselves and say hello.
Would you like to do a roll call, Madam Clerk?
I can do that.
All right, why don't you go ahead and do that?
I don't have my orderly roll call sheet because I'm not usually at a work session, but I do see that Dan Z is here. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm here, and
okay.
I'll get the video up so you can see me in my t-shirt.
All right. And I see Mayor Tartar's here. We've heard him speak.
I am. I've got my t-shirt on, holding my stomach in, holding my gut in.
See, Vice Mayor Conley is here. He's here.
I'm here.
Let's see. Who else do we have? We have Dave Snyder is here. Is that
yes?
correct?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hardy is here.
I am here.
Mr. Duncan is here.
Hi there.
Hello. And Mr. Litkenhouse is here.
I am here.
Thank you very much. Have a great meeting.
Thank you, Celeste.
Mayor? Dave?
Yes, I need to unmute. Sorry about that. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to add, I think Wyatt's probably going to talk about this, but I was going to make sure that people knew that the grant program that the EDA is heading up opened their applications on Friday. And the current date for applications to be turned in is this coming Friday at 11:30 p.m. And again, that's for up to $2,000 grants to our local independent small businesses who have been impacted by the pandemic.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that information and all the work everyone has done to try to get that program moving and get as much assistance as we can to our local businesses. But speaking of which, an update from Mr. Shields. Our city manager has asked that we move this to the first item on the agenda, and unless there's objection, I'll go ahead and maybe turn it over to our city manager for a city manager's report. Mr. Shields?
Mr. Mayor, before we get there, I wanted to recognize particularly the Columbia Baptist Church. Recall that a down economy hurts not just businesses, but nonprofits. They run a very important food pantry in Northern Virginia, and traditionally had acquired their food from the Capital Area Food Bank, which has nothing left. So they did a food drive on Saturday. They had dozens of volunteers and a wonderful community outpouring of food for the critically important food programs that the Columbia Baptist Church runs. Thank you.
All right, thanks for giving us a heads up of that. The church has certainly been active, and we greatly appreciate their efforts. Anything else before we turn this over to Mr. Shields? Mr. Shields, are you there?
I am. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of council. Let me show off my my Falls Church Together shirt. So I'll take Councilmember Hardy's cue and provide just a quick update on a couple of items relating to economic, the EDA's grant program, and then from there transitioned into some discussions about the economy and the governor's announcement today, and then from there discuss some issues relating to stormwater and the Dual Trails program. So starting with the EDA, as the mayor noted and Councilmember Hardy noted, the EDA did meet on on Tuesday night, and they approved the Falls Church Small Business COVID-19 Emergency Grant Program. And what that program is an allocation of $100,000 of EDA funds in its first tranche, where small businesses can apply for a $2,000 grant, and the targeted businesses are businesses that have an established bricks and mortar location in the city of Falls Church and have had for at least 1 year. That we're targeting small businesses, so businesses between $50,000 and $500,000 in gross receipts per year is the target. And businesses that are most severely impacted by the governor's executive order 53. And so we're talking specifically restaurants, barbershops, hair salons, businesses that really can't operate in their normal way under the existing program or under those regulations. To date, as of this morning, we had received about 40 applications, and we'll keep those numbers updated. The applications will first be screened to make sure that they're eligible under the program, under those few eligibility criteria that I listed. And then those that are eligible, we're assuming there will be probably more applications than there are funds available, and there'll be a randomized drawing to allocate the grants. The EDA did want to first roll this out at a $100,000 allocation using its funds, and the funds that it have are funds that were derived from the sale of property where the Harris Teeter building is today. And so the other action that the EDA took was to allocate those funds from their land banking program to instead this investment in our small business community. The EDA is committed to coming back to the council with a report on the results of the program and what they've learned from the program. And then after that, there'll be an evaluation as to whether they would continue the program with any additional funding from the EDA's funding source. So that's an update on that. More to come. The deadline for applications is this Friday, and so we're encouraging businesses that have this need to act quickly. The application is simple, and it's meant to be a fast-moving program. So a lot of thanks to the EDA and to the EDO staff who've stood this up rather quickly, and for all the city council members that were involved in putting this together as well. It was also noted that the mayor signed a proclamation urging our residents to support our small businesses, and we have a small business Saturday program for every Saturday of the month of May, and we'll be getting more information out on how people can participate in that throughout this month. I'll transition from that discussion to just a quick briefing on the governor's announcement today. A couple of the headlines from today's announcement at 2 o'clock was that the Executive Order 53, which puts in the social distancing rules and the restrictions on certain businesses, that was extended from the May 8th date. It was extended for an additional week to May 15th, or till midnight of May 14th, which is not this Thursday, but Thursday next. I'll talk a little bit about what the governor has said he's looking at before he will make a final decision on relaxing the restrictions, which he's calling the Phase 1 reopening that would be effective on May 15th. The data that the governor's been looking at is a basket of data that follow the White House's guidelines for when it is safe to begin to ease up on the restrictions. And so that basket of gateway criteria include 14 days of decline of new cases, or, given the fact that testing is ramping up, a 14-day decline of new cases as a percentage of daily tests. That percentage is declining. It's currently at about 15% of the tests that are given every day in the Commonwealth of Virginia are a positive for COVID-19 at the present. That's down for about 20% several weeks ago. And that's largely because of the increase in testing. The other gateway criteria, a declining rate of hospitalization related to COVID-19, declining rates of use of the intensive care units, declining rates of use of ventilators in our hospitals, and declining deaths. The other key indicators that are reporting from our hospitals and from our first responders that we have adequate personal protective equipment so that if there's a spike in cases, we're prepared for it to keep our medical staff safe, that we've put in place a robust contact tracing mechanism so that when there are positive cases, the people they've been in touch with can be identified and potentially quarantined, and of course ramping up testing. The Virginia is currently at 6,000 tests per day, and they're targeting ramping up to 10,000 tests per day. Regionally, these gateway criteria are very similar for Maryland, DC, and Virginia, with some differences, but largely those criteria are the same. The governor, I believe, is the first to actually set a date, which he did reserve the right to change again if the criteria don't indicate, if there's a spike in cases, that he may extend it further. Although I will say in his announcement, he seemed fairly sure that that Friday the 15th was the target date when the relaxed restrictions would take effect. Maryland has not yet set a similar date, nor has DC. So what this means in practicality is that barbershops, hair salons will likely reopen, but they will operate in new and different ways. For instance, he referenced that barbershops would not be able to take walk-in customers, that you would need to have an appointment. Restaurants would be open, but they would need to be spacing between tables to operate with adequate social distancing. He did not give details on how these, what the rules will be for reopening, and he said that more information will be forthcoming. A couple of the other things that he noted, I've got a slide that we've taken from the governor's presentation, that rather than we'll probably move away from the mandatory stay-at-home order, which we're currently under, to a safer-at-home message, particularly if you are in a vulnerable, if you have vulnerabilities due to age or compromised immune system. The limit on social gatherings would be at 10 individuals in phase one. There'd be continued social distancing, focus on teleworking for office workers, masks, and he really emphasized this, that masks really do need to become much more prevalent than they are right now as we open up the economy in this phase one, and easing limits on business and the faith communities. So more details will come, but I think those are some of the highlights. He did indicate that this phase one is likely to last 2 to 4 weeks. So we'd be looking at presumably mid-June before moving into phase two. And in phase two, a couple of the points that he would say what phase two looks like is on the next slide. Stay at home for vulnerable populations. The social gatherings would be increased to 50 individuals. Continued social distancing, relying on teleworking, face coverings, and there'd be a further easing of business restrictions relative to phase one. How long phase two looks, I think, would be driven by the data. It says 2 to 4 weeks, and then move into phase three. And that's the basic trajectory that he's laid out in his roadmap. Working regionally, we have been working through COG to try to ensure that Maryland, DC, and Virginia are coordinated in their openings. So we'll see how that plays out over the coming days, and more to come on that. We have internally a business reopening group that is working to try to think ahead about what some of the issues our business community will be asking us in terms of their reopening strategies, and we'll be communicating more on that, always following the advice of our health experts and following the directives from the governor, and but at the Falls Church level, trying to provide as much information and as much assistance to our business community so that when they do open, they do so in a way that will keep their employees safe and keep the public safe. I will note two other things just in the area of the economy. One, I do want the council and the community to be aware that the city is currently evaluating Insight's resubmittal for the Washington and Broad project. As the council knows, there was a round of staff comments on their initial application. They have provided additional information with respect to their parking layouts and other aspects of their proposal. That resubmittal is listed and posted on the city's webpage, and so the public can see what has been submitted. We're working towards arranging a meeting with the city council so that we can present the project and get the council fully up to speed on this project. It has been interrupted, obviously, with the emergency. The other thing I want to report on the economic front, the 10-acre West Falls Church development. As council is aware, in the Falls Church Gateway's proposal, they have proposed for that phase two office to be moved slightly further west than in their original proposal. What that involves then is that phase two office building would be located more on the trapezoid parking lot that the schools have. Part of the original approval was predicated that when that phase two office is built, all the parking that the schools currently have in that trapezoid area would be replaced and would be constructed at no charge to the city by the developer. We are currently studying that proposal with some of the members of the original evaluation consulting team, just to help us assess the feasibility of that phase 2 office. That's always been important to the city to make sure that that is a viable office building. And we'll have more information on that. So some of the issues, we just want to have our own, independent of the developers' views, our own view of access to that office building, whether it's a good location for office to be successful, how it will be parked, and some of the cost proposals or cost ramifications to the developer of needing to provide structured parking for the schools at the same time that they'll provide parking for the office building when that phase 2 time comes. And so we'll share our best thinking on that with the city council, and you'll get the developer's perspective on it as well. And that also needs to be scheduled on the council's work session agenda. Lastly, just to shift to a bit on stormwater. First, I'll just note that we did get a lot of rain. It's been one of the rainiest Aprils last couple of weeks. I think we set some records over the month of April for particularly the second half of the month. And last night we received 1.5 inches of rain in about just under an hour. And as the council will know, flooding in Falls Church is all about intensity, and we can typically, anytime we get more than 1 inch in 20 minutes, that's when we start to have flooding problems. And true to form, we did not have complaints last night of flooding at the rate of about 1.5 inches in an hour. So it was an intense rainfall, but the stormwater system largely handled it completely to the best of our knowledge. We're not aware of any complaints of flooding from last night. Also on the front of stormwater, we have the Dual Trails project, which the Northern Virginia Regional Parks Authority is taking through the site plan process with the city's planning staff. A lot of our comments have related to stormwater, and a good number of our public comments are related to stormwater as well. And they really are in two different spheres. One is just in terms of how the Park Authority is handling stormwater throughout the length of the trail where this Dual Trails project is happening, and are there opportunities to improve the status quo in terms of how stormwater is treated off of the 100-foot right-of-way throughout the city. So that's been one big area of discussion between the city and the Parks Authority. We have a new submittal that was just received in April, and that's under review right now. And a lot of our clarifying questions related to stormwater. So more information to come on that. And then the second big area of concern is the Trammell Branch. One of the major projects that's in the Stormwater Task Force list of projects is to widen the culvert underneath the WNOD to its ultimate outfall into 4 Mile Run. The city has considered a new design where we in fact don't cross the trail, but instead run on the south side of the trail all the way sort of the length of the right-of-way down to the 4 mile and create a new 4 Mile Run outfall. That has some attractive elements to it, and that is currently under review by the Park Authority in terms of the feasibility of constructing that without damaging their new trail. Because our project is largely due to the permitting requirements for any kind of an expansion like this. We know that we're not going to be able to catch up to the Parks Authority in terms of their Dual Trails project. So we just want to make sure we're not undoing the good work that they'll do in this project. And that's really what that review is about. If we can't get a good conclusion on the south option, then we will reconsider the crossing over to the north side if that is the Park Authority's preference. So that is the state of that dialogue right now. We will get it resolved before this Dual Trails project is put out to bid. Lastly, if I could just end with a couple of notes of thanks. Our city has been the beneficiary of a lot of generosity from our community, and I'll just note a couple of examples of it, and we've been trying to note these in our daily briefings as well. And the ones I'll cite just are the examples of donations of personal protective equipment that have been used by our police department and by all of our essential personnel who are coming to work throughout this crisis. Mary Mole of Mary Stitches donated 50 masks recently for the use of the police department. Zoya's Atelier donated 200 masks that will be used by the police department and employees when we begin to return in greater numbers to work. And we've also had donations of gloves by Mehdi Sabil that are being used by the police department. There have been many other acts of generosity of donations of food and warm meals for our police officers, almost too many to list, but we will list them, and we will also send a personal thank you note to everybody who has helped the city organization out during this very tough time. And it is, I think, just one of many examples of how people have come together and helped each other during what has been a very difficult and challenging time for everybody. And as much stress as everybody is, these acts of generosity are really impactful, and we're very grateful for them. So that's a rather lengthy report tonight, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I'll just note also that when we get to the budget item, Karen Bawa will provide an update on a lot of her conversations with national, state, and regional peers about the state of the economy and about what people are anticipating or projecting in terms of the fiscal fallout. And at these points, it's all projections. There's really very little data for us to go off of, but we'll be sharing that information as well. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions or comments on that report.
Yep. All right, thank you, Mr. Shields. And before we get to any comments or questions, two other items. One, while we were conducting this meeting, I got an email from Deb Roth who suggests those who are interested in getting a T-shirt, Google Falls Church Better Together, and you will be able to find the link to purchase the T-shirts, and they'll ship them right to your door. And as we said earlier, they'll provide a lot of help to a lot of needy families and also businesses that are in very challenging times. Also, secondly, the city flag will be flying at half-mast in honor and recognition of those who we have lost and also those who suffer, as a visible sign of our solidarity with those people and as a community. So that will be happening in the near future. Are there any other questions? Are there questions from Mr. Shields or comments from Mr. Shields?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yep. Wyatt, can you just go back just for a second to the West Falls Church project, a discussion over the office building and the parking? Can you kind of go over the genesis of that that analysis again while we're doing that?
Yes. So again, what Falls Church Gateway Partners has proposed is to move the Phase 2 office building. It always was had a sort of a bite out of the trapezoid project. That's part of their current approvals, and they are requesting to move it further west to take about another quarter acre of the trapezoid parking lot that would be used for the Phase 2 office building. The school board is looking at that now. They'll give their feedback on it. I think probably in a nutshell, the question from the city's perspective, and there might be others, but at its most basic sense is we want this Phase 2 office building to be feasible and financeable. Does the burden of needing to replace the parking for the schools overburden the office building to really impair its feasibility? That's one of the questions that we're asking for, a little bit of an independent view of, in terms of just understanding that element of the question. And there are some other sort of practical questions about how traffic will flow and things like that, and we want to explore those as well.
Does that jeopardize anything related to our academic versus commercial ratio?
Well, as you will recall, we were well under the 30% ratio that is part of the water sale agreement and the boundary adjustment agreement. So we will certainly go through all those numbers and present those numbers so that that is clearly understood. But that is, I think, mathematically, it will remain under the 30% limit.
That's good. Has there been any conversation with the Gateway partners as to concern over their retail programming in light of what's been happening?
Well, yes. Their basic take on it is that they're going to be opening the retail 4 years from now. Mm-hmm. And so they are planning to proceed and stay on schedule and seek their special exception site plan on the schedule that they always envisioned, closing on the same schedule that they always envisioned, etc., on the assumption that the economy will rebound and this type of highly walkable retail will be successful. It would not be successful today, obviously, but I think they're acting on the premise that it will come back and it will be successful in the future.
That's good. When the timing is right, and we're probably a little too far out from that point, there's been a lot of conversation in the industry about how retail programming would change. When the timing is appropriate, and again, we are 4 years out, luckily 4 years out, it'd be good to chat with them about how they may see their retail programming change, because I think it may drastically impact the way that some of those retailers may operate. And so when we have that opportunity, I'd certainly like to bring them in to chat about that. Have they given any indication as to concern over the amount of commitment for office that they've made? And any kind of indication as to shifting towards other asset types that, if you can look into a crystal ball 4 years from now, may seem a better option than what has already been programmed?
They have, and everything that they've communicated with us, they want to honor the ratios and the mix of uses that they committed to. So they have not asked for any change to that, nor have they asked for any change to the economic terms in light of the current crisis. So that is what's very positive. What they are asking for, however, is to have more above grade parking. That is a change that is really what's behind the shift of that phase 2 office a quarter acre further west.
Okay. I think it might be useful just to lob across a question, and I'm sure they're already thinking about this, how streetscapes and cafe seating outside of retail may change as a result of this. I mean, I am a believer that based on what I've read and just studied, not having been out much, but just from what folks are talking about a reopening from a retail perspective, the social distancing that will either be compelled or just kind of naturally, organically taking place may change the way that cafe-style seating, or in terms of how businesses are operating inside their enclosed spaces, may change. I would be curious to know if they've thought about that and how that may change the streetscape and the sidewalks and some of the other things that they're doing there. I don't think that it's going to drastically impact necessarily the financials from a retail perspective, but it would be good to know how the look and feel of that may change. And again, we're 4 years out. We're still in lockdown, so there's still time, but it's something that I'd like to keep a finger on the pulse of.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from Mr. Shields?
Mayor, I do.
Okay, Ms. Hardy.
Wyatt, so going back to the coronavirus pandemic, so with the governor's announcements today, while it's certainly exciting that we might have a plan to reopen, I wanted to dive a little bit more into the data behind it. So I think it's the first time I had seen the data that showed number of positive cases over number of tests, so that kind of percentage.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think your positives just growing doesn't really tell you much because we're obviously hopefully testing more. Do we have indication that that's happening statewide? So in Falls Church in particular, where I'm going with it is, over the weekend, we saw the news that in Falls Church, we had a pretty dramatic jump of 10 more cases, 5 hospitalizations, and unfortunately 2 more deaths. Do we think that's also because we're testing more, as indicated in that statewide data, or is there something more unique that we should be concerned about?
I probably am not able to comment on it with any great knowledge. I can just relay the general commentary that, of course, as the testing ramps up, the number of cases is going to ramp up as well. And but one thing that I have heard our health directors speak to is that on one hand, while it's useful to see where the cases are by zip code, which Fairfax Health is doing right now, almost as a proxy perhaps for how certain aspects of our population are more severely impacted than other parts of our population, demographics, what kind of work you do, that type of thing. The health directors say this virus is in the community. It's not really caring what the city lines are or the county lines are, even really what the state lines are. And so they are not very focused on these sort of smaller areas unless there's an outbreak. And then in the outbreak scenario, then they do want to have interventions to do the contact tracing and really try to suppress that outbreak. Once the numbers drop, I think the outbreak strategy is going to be much more important for the overall response, with the goal of where you're not having an outbreak, the economy can be pretty open and really, what we would think was pretty normal. But where there is an outbreak, you focus there and really try to suppress it there. So a more targeted approach based on following the data.
Was there any more discussion about kind of a Northern Virginia or DC region kind of strategy versus statewide, or are we just looking at state data to make that decision?
There were several questions to the governor about that again today, and he, at this conference, reaffirmed the statewide approach and really pushed back against the idea of having a different schedule for Northern Virginia or other parts of the state. So that was the message of today.
It's something that we'll need to think about is, if the clock has started for seeing that kind of downward trajectory elsewhere in the state, if the DC region hasn't seen that yet, what does that mean for kind of the residents up here in terms of what risk we'd be opening ourselves up to?
That's right. I think that is generally more the concern now, is that we are lagging behind the rest of the state in terms of our downward trajectory.
Yep. So turning to Falls Church, do we have any more updates or dates on when we might make decisions about summer camps or other kind of childcare facilities that operate in the city?
So today's announcement actually is kind of an important step in that decision-making process. So certainly over the next 2 weeks, I think we're going to be getting much more information out there. I think we're certainly going to have virtual offerings. How much stuff we can do in a congregate setting is really going to be driven on further announcements from the governor. There are a series of task force that are working regionally to try to coordinate this so that Vienna is not doing one thing and Falls Church is doing a different thing, Fairfax a third thing, but try to stay on pretty much the same page in terms of how we're handling summer camps and big special events over the summer as well.
Yeah, I think having consistent policy makes sense. But childcare, I think, is really important as part of the reopening strategy. So what I want to make sure happens at the state level is some thought around how we support people with families. So you can reopen businesses, but obviously those employees can't go work in those businesses if the kids are out of school, there are no summer camps, there aren't childcare facilities. And so I don't want to be putting parents in a difficult position where they have to make bad choices by either leaving kids at home or taking them to work and exposing them to potentially risky situations too. And so I think childcare just needs to be part of that reopening strategy. We need to figure out how to do that safely. And I'm not saying it's a Falls Church specific issue, but I'd love to see more of it discussed statewide because I don't see that currently.
I agree. Thank you.
And then one last, more of a request. I fielded several questions from our neighborhood pools I think they're looking for guidance. Normally they open kind of Memorial Day weekend, and they're looking for guidance on, should that happen? Should they not? I've connected them to kind of our state representatives, but I'm not sure they have any more information either. Is the health department the better source, or do we have any early indication for them? Because they need to do all that planning and preparation to get pools open. And some of that can't just be done on a dime.
You're correct. And Memorial Day is coming soon. So that is a big question. I will say this, in all times, opening a pool is a health department intensive activity. There's a lot of regulation of pools that's done by our local health department. So I don't have the final word on how pools are going to operate. I do know that the health department is going to have everything to do with it because they regulate them so closely anyway. But I don't think they have not put out very good guidance yet. And I know that the pressure is on them to do so. So more to come on that topic.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for now.
Are there any other questions or comments from Mr. Shields?
May I spend a moment on stormwater?
Of course, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. I think we all received a email from Mr. Gustafson, our stormwater monitor. I just wanted to read a response that he sent, just one paragraph of it, after the rains that we've had just recently. Gustafson said, I sent Mike Domenica some photos on Thursday and more today from downed trees across 4 Mile Run. It looks like DPW cleaned up some of the downed trees I alerted Mike to on Thursday, which is fantastic. Looks like there are now more, if you'll remember from July the 8th. Some of the damming on 4 Mile Run likely compounded the flooding and sewage problems at Shadow Walk and West Columbia. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention and make sure that it's on our radar screen to, take care of any tree fall that might be able to make conditions there a little safer. That's all.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. And I did forward that email from Mr. Gustafson to our Department of Public Works, and Mr. Goff reported back to me this evening that he will get to it tomorrow. So we will get back with folks just to let them know that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other comments or questions from Mr. Shields? All right, Mr. Shields, do you want to move on to the budget presentation, or Ms. Bawa?
So I'll turn it over to Ms. Bawa for a report on her the briefings that she's participating in regionally, statewide, and nationally. I also just want to note for Council that late this afternoon we put out the Council's budget questions document, sort of round one, and that is, we'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions on that, but we'll be recording any additional questions tonight. Let me turn it over to Ms. Bawa.
Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of the council. I'll just give you a brief update on how things are evolving at the national, state, and regional levels. So the events are, of course, they continue to unfold. We are in a severe contraction since March. This is going to be a sharp decrease, hopefully a shorter duration compared to the 2008-2010 economic crisis. However, the speed and the severity are historic in terms of the decline this time around. So at the national level, the Bureau of Economic Analysis posted the advanced estimate for the first quarter of calendar year 2020, that's January to March. They reported a decrease of 4.8% in the US GDP. The contraction began in March, so the impact started right away. The second quarter is expected to be worse through June. Decline is projected to be in the range of 22 to 40%. In the last financial crisis, just to put kind of a scale, so in the last financial crisis of 2008 through 2010, the deepest quarterly decline in the US GDP was 8.4%, and that was in the fourth quarter of 2008. So comparing to that, the 22 to 40% decline in the second quarter is several times deeper than the previous financial crisis. So for overall national GDP and for the overall calendar year 2020 forecast, there is still a lot of uncertainty surrounding those forecasts, ranging from 3% decline to 7%. The Congressional Budget Office posted their forecast of a 5.4% reduction projected for this calendar year. Their assumptions include that the current extent of social distancing will continue on average, with some regional variations, would continue through June. And then there is a possibility of a resurgence of the pandemic, projecting some sort of social distancing, although to a lesser degree, but would continue through mid-2021. And it would reduce further the following 6 months. So those are their projections. The Conference Board is projecting a decline of 6.6% with a fall recovery. However, they have already declared if there is a COVID resurgence, their projections adjusted forecast is a 7.4% decline for the calendar year 2020 GDP. So again, for reference, the deepest decline in the US GDP for the national level for the whole calendar year in the last financial crisis was 2.5% decline in the GDP, and that was in 2009. We are looking at 3 to 7% for this calendar year, and just kind of putting things a little bit in perspective. So, well, overall policy response has been rapid and quick. There have been 4 legislative packages totaling over $2.8 trillion in emergency funds. And we have started getting news on some, and some for future phases are yet to evolve out. On the unemployment claims, 26.5 million new claims have been filed for unemployment in the most recent 5 weeks at the national level, which is roughly 16% of the US workforce. Virginia claims went up last week to 493,000 total claims for the first 5 weeks, with food preparation and serving occupations such as restaurants, bars, and hotels, and also retail, personal care, and some office occupations taking the lead. Large impacts nationally include capital spending, durable goods, orders, home sales, all posted declines. And for March, and sharper declines are expected in April figures. At the state level, the budget amendment bill for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 passed and was signed by the governor. All new initiatives, such as including our $2 million for affordable housing, are on hold, and also the increases for the police and library. So we are in the process of reviewing the bill for further details, and the General Assembly plans to revisit the fiscal year 21 budget in fall. Regional level, Northern Virginia jurisdictions are in the process of budget deliberations. Some are adopting previously proposed budgets that they did in March, with amendments to come in July. Some others are keeping fiscal year 2020 budget flat, and some are in the process of revising revenues. So overall, balancing measures that most are considering include eliminating planned employee compensation increases in fiscal year 21, freezing vacancies and hiring immediately, deferring funding for capital projects, and also reducing other discretionary funding. Some have looked at the use of stabilization reserves, but most are waiting to get a grip on the extent of the revenue decline and possibly utilize the reserves should the situation get worse. No furloughs or reduction in force has been proposed by any jurisdiction so far. However, furloughs may be considered as most jurisdictions revisit the budget in September-October timeframe. So overall, the recovery outlook is dependent on the health response and the opening of the businesses. The businesses have to increase confidence with both the employees and the customers to return to some sort of normalcy. Forecasts are mixed on the recovery. There are two approaches that are going on side by side. One is projecting a deep decline with gradual step-by-step recovery by late 21 or fiscal year 2022 to come back to pre-pandemic level. And the other approach is called the W recovery. Things improve, we reopen, possibility of another fall resurgence, followed with another dip, and then take the steps back up. So remains to be seen how things will unfold. The recovery will, of course, be uneven across various sectors of the economy, across different regions. So similarly, the forecasts, regional, state, national, will evolve based on reopening of businesses and the resurgence of the pandemic, if there should be one. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation and bring to you any relevant information. That concludes my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there questions for Ms. Bawa?
I have, yes, I do. First of all, a comment on your excellent report on both context and the progress that you've seen, as well as information from not just regionally but nationally, because all that eventually filters its way down to us. So that's a great job, and thank you for answering more than what I expected in terms of asking for the comparison between the last recession and this one. And obviously, this one is much more frightening. It's a natural event. There's no way to politicize it in a manner that removes the natural disaster aspect of it. What does your intelligence tell you that we should look for with respect for a resurgence when people decide that hey, you only have one life, and just go around running wild? I think we're in a far better place than, say, Dade County, Miami beaches, or other places that have beaches. And of course, we never expected the Californians to react the way they have. But is there a notion that you coalesce around for a stretch of time when we should be aware of a resurgence of the COVID-19?
I think that's a question for the health officials. However, as far as the economic prong goes, we are keeping that in mind. Should there be a resurgence or a phase two, based on that, we took a moderate approach at this time. And by the time we come back to you at the first quarterly report, if a reoccurrence has taken place, we would readjust our revenues and the shortfall accordingly and come back with the measures. There is no crystal ball out there. However, I'm hearing same things most people are about. The numbers could go on, the fatalities could go higher. So it remains to be seen if this phase will continue longer or we'll come out of it now and then, take another dip, which could be more detrimental to come out and then take another dip. But either way, the revenues would need to be adjusted, and it would take longer and more effort to bring confidence level back.
Yes, I hear you about gaining the confidence levels. I mean, it's a social phenomenon that we don't know how it's going to go yet. So we all have this expression: once burned, twice shy. So I think the second dip could be much worse. But nonetheless, I think we're prepared to address that. And this last question, maybe for you or possibly for the city manager, that what is the relative range of deficit that we would encounter before we dip into reserves? I hate to bring that question up, but it's only about to.
Since Kieran is not answering, I would say this. It seems to me that it's the use of reserves is a question both of the speed as well as the depth of a fiscal crisis. And if there's enough time, I think we could work together as a workforce and as a community to make the appropriate adjustments to realign our fiscals with what the economy is allowing. If you don't have time, then sometimes you need to use your unassigned fund balance to buy yourself enough time to make the changes to adjust to a sudden fiscal crisis. That's why we're not proposing any use of unassigned fund balance in this budget. And I don't think so long as we have time to react to things that we will propose that as a budgetary construct. I think it's something that you resort to when there's so little time that you're not able to make the structural changes that you need to make.
Well, that's a very good answer, and possibly one that we could give to the cabbage truck driving down the mountainside trail in Venezuela when the wheel slipped off the slope and had a catastrophic dip. I would say this, if it does get considered, that I think that we need to structure it as a loan, or we pay it back. No matter what it takes. Because, once it's gone, then people go, oh well, let's open that. We've reached that dam, and I agree with you. I would be very reluctant to do that. Thank you so much.
And I would just note that your council policies, I think, are aligned with what you just said, where if we do, in an emergency, draw down our unassigned fund balance, there's a 3-year period to get back to the minimum level and a 5-year period to get back to the target. And we're at the target today. So that analogy to a loan to ourselves, I think, is an apt one based on your policies today.
All right, thank you. Are there other questions or comments from Ms. Bawa?
Mr. Mayor, if I may add a little bit more to that response, just reminding everyone, the city has assumed an unprecedented amount of general obligation debt of over $150 million in the last 2 years, which makes our annual debt service well above 14% of our total expenditures right now. So this obligation makes it important for us to realize that we should maintain adequate reserves as the current health crisis unfolds. We are not going for an immediate obligation bond within the next year or two. However, we have to maintain good fiscal prudence in observing the levels that we had shown to the rating agencies.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments from Ms. Bawa or Mr. Shields?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, Vice Mayor Connolly.
Ms. Bawa, this is just related to the investment that we've made in the pension fund. Has the return on that changed at all for this year? Or if it hasn't changed for this year, do you expect it might change next year? Or has the smoothing that we've done in recent years lessened that problem?
So the last quarter that we saw was pre the pandemic. So we haven't seen any of those quarterly results, but I'm expecting that there are going to be fluctuations downwards that we're going to see in the next, possibly the next or the following retirement board meeting. However, the smoothing helps us in situations when we see, spikes upwards or downwards. And for that reason, that was included in the formula when the administrative regulations were done for coming up with that. So it is going to help us. However, at this point, the intent is that the 640,000 that we are using from the return on investment is continues to come for our operating budget. So that's not affected.
All right, thank you. Are there other questions or comments? All right. So, Mr. Shields, do you have any more information about town halls or other ways the public may be able to get involved in this process?
Sorry, I need to unmute. We are looking forward to having town halls. So the basic issue is this. The video conferencing tools that we have right now, we're evaluating them, and if you sort of look around the state, one of the crucial features is to be able to protect the integrity of your town hall and protect against what people would call a Zoom bomber, someone who comes in with obscenities and is not interested in really what the meeting of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting is, to be able to turn off their camera and mute them. And so we want to have that capacity for a town hall meeting, and then you can publicize the link. Everybody can join in, have a presentation, get Q&A in real time. But you do need to, I think the best practice is to just have a procedure in place. If someone, if they're speaking on topic and expressing a view, obviously they'd be allowed to do that. But if they're doing something criminal or obscene or something like that, to quickly be able to get that out of the venue. So that's just the piece of it that we need to solidify, and then we'll schedule those so we can have town hall meetings on this and a whole host of other things for land use cases and et cetera.
All right, thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments from Mr. Shields or Ms. Bawa?
Yeah, I've got a few actually.
All right, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Got a second. Yeah, I want to go back to, are we going to cover budget questions related to traffic calming and spot improvements? Is that still on the agenda?
Sure.
Okay. I noticed in the response, and Wyatt, I appreciate you guys putting this together, our questions related to budget last week. I'm still incredibly disappointed that we're sacrificing the small amount for traffic calming and spot improvements in our 2020 and 2021 budgets. You guys give any more thoughts to ways that we can try to find money and effort to make those things happen for those years?
So just to, again, what is proposed in the budget is a pause to October to assess where we are in the economy, and so I do want to make clear that that's what the proposal is, and we would continue to advance them to the best extent possible using staff resources as opposed to consultant dollars to get them teed up and ready to go. I think in October, let's just focus on the NTC first. If in October we are, let's say hypothetically, in a worse fiscal condition than we think than we're projecting today, then I think we'll have a discussion then. What is the best way to advance these initiatives? And it could be that we scale them down and we focus more on lighter solutions and find the funding for that, and do the heavier solutions down the road. Or we could come to different conclusions on it. What I'm recommending at the present time is simply for the ones that are paid for out of pay-as-you-go funds to press the pause button until the fall, so we can reassess where we are with the economy and fiscally.
So why would we pause those as opposed to pausing other things we spend money on?
So that's a good question. Really the only things that we would not be pausing, for instance, one that we have proposed not to pause is the regular paving budget. That is $250,000. In my proposed budget, we had plus that, back in March 9th, we had increased that to $350,000 with a goal of getting that up to, ultimately getting that to about $750,000 or more a year to make sure we're just staying on top of basic maintenance of our streets. So in this budget, we have not cut paving below the $250,000 level on the theory that a dollar not spent on replacing your paving roads is a dollar that you guaranteed are going to have to spend a year later. And so that's what's behind that recommendation. And then the only other pay-as-you-go dollars are for a small amount left over in facilities reinvestment, and that's really just to deal with emergencies. If we have an HVAC unit not work, we want to have some set of funds to be able to fix that situation. So that's why that facilities maintenance wasn't zeroed out completely. Those are just two other examples, but there's not a lot of pay-as-you-go. There's really not a whole lot of discretionary dollars in the budget now.
Okay. Well, I'm just referring to the answers that you gave about $100,000 in fiscal year 2021 for neighborhood traffic calming and the $400,000 in fiscal year 2020. It says the light and heavy solutions, as noted above, will be deferred until after the October reevaluation. I guess my question is why for those items do we need to wait to reevaluate when we could potentially move forward with those things now?
Well, ultimately, that is I think that's the discussion we should be having right now to make sure that this is aligned with what the council wants to do. I have put forward a proposal to hold funds back of really essentially any discretionary spending until October.
I guess. Okay. So my point is I don't look at those as discretionary spending. I look at those as public safety and things people have been asking for. And in terms of dollars that have been allocated, I mean, that's a drop in the bucket compared to where we're spending money on other areas. And you gave a very, I thought, succinct and detailed view of how our surplus and our debt service savings have been spent. And we've got things that folks have been asking for that are now being punted to October, which I don't really see any reason that we should be doing that. Those are things that I think that we should be moving forward with. And frankly, regardless of what happens, we should be able to find areas in the budget to accommodate those. This is, in my opinion, the perfect time to make those investments in infrastructure and transportation, especially now. And I think they'll be more important than ever. And so if there are questions of where do we find that money or that effort, I would like to see options to include those back in the budget for 2020 and 2021 and make a decision as to what might need to be held out. But in my opinion, those are one, it's already meager funds to begin with. I think that we should do more given the mission and the vision of the city. And two, if it's a problem of where we're going to get the money and resources from, I'm happy to debate that. But this is something that I think that shouldn't be put off till October. I think there are things that we should be proceeding with as planned. I think they're that important. And COVID or not, there are things that we can move forward with.
All right, other comments, questions?
Mayor, this is Letty.
Yes, Letty.
So I would support Ross's comment to look at options of what we can do to bring back some or all of the NTC funding. So I don't know where we are in the budget process, whether we have room to talk about options of what it would take, like what are the trade-offs, but I think that would be helpful for the conversation so we know what else we'd have to give up if we were to bring that one back in. I did want to follow up on two of my questions from last week. One had to do with the accounting of what was, I guess, our surplus back in February. So I saw that it was in, I think it was line 72 down in that Q&A document you sent out this evening. So out of the $7 million total, so that's the 2.5 plus the 4.6 or so, how much of that has already been spent? What's on hold till October, other than the traffic calming that we just discussed? Are there opportunities there to kind of pull money out as needed?
So the big ones would be the library project and the city hall project. Ms. Bawa, can you add to that in terms of dollars already spent?
I know that on the library project, when I last saw it a few weeks back, we had about $1.5 million in expenditures overall project-wide, not particularly this pot of money. And on City Hall, the full 1.2 million has been PO'd, purchase order has been created for the work that hit for the HIT contract that they're doing. So that is considered fully committed at this point. West Falls Church Planning Project, 150,000 was for legal work and other surveying and other things. So some POs have been created. I cannot quote you a number that's remaining. However, we are going to need that to pay through the end of the phase for the completion of the before the land passes on to the developer. So and the school facilities reinvestment, the 389, they have committed some funding to one of their school projects, but they are holding off on the remaining funding that they were thinking of. I do not have a number. I can get you a number on that one as well. On the neighborhood traffic calming, I think Cindy might be in a better position to tell us if there is anything that has been spent. I know community meetings have been happening, but I'm not sure if any funding has been spent to date on that one yet.
And that's that 400,000 I think Wyatt said would be on hold until October, right. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, nothing spent out of the 400,000.
I think the general sentiment, at least for mine, is that it's just unfortunate we're looking at nearly $7 million back in February. Obviously, no one had a crystal ball to predict where we'd be in. So I think if we could turn back time, we might make different decisions now. I wanted to cover my questions around HHS. From the Q&A document, it sounds like two buckets. HHS believes we have sufficient money around the tax relief program, but requesting maybe potentially another 45 on emergency assistance. Is that right, Wyatt? Or that would be meeting what we think the need would be?
Let me call up that document. Those responses actually were provided directly by HHS. And so I think that is correct, that is what they would identify as the gap between the demand and the resources available in that area. That is correct.
201. So again, normally we do this at the markup stage, but I guess I would put in my request now that I would like to figure out how we can support the 45,000 that we think is the demand out there that we're currently not meeting. I think this is on top of the 39,000 we expect to get from federal CDBG money. I think our goal should be is that we should not be turning anyone away. And so if that's what we think we need, another 45 to meet that need, I'd like to figure out, again, options on what it would take to put that in the budget. And then likewise, I know we often refer people to our nonprofits that work with kind of the Fairfax area. Do we have a sense of how their funding levels are? I know we often refer people to food pantries out there and other organizations, but obviously those are pretty strapped right now. Do we normally contribute to those groups? And if so, do they have higher needs from us too?
So the Community Services Fund is how the City Council allocates funds to qualified nonprofits who do social services in the city. And Ms. Bawa, do you know the status of that application process and the expectation for what those grants will be this year?
Unfortunately, no, but I can find out and include it in the next round of responses.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. So besides obviously meeting the requests that come to our door, if we refer people out to those nonprofits, I want to make sure they're getting help there as well. or where we should anticipate larger, bills that we get from the Community Services Foundation or fund.
That is correct. And my recollection is that we kept the Community Service Fund. That was an area that was not cut in this proposed budget. Ms. Bawa, do you know that off the top of your head, or is that something we need to follow up on? That's my
No,
memory.
that's correct. That's correct. We have not cut the funding from the fiscal year 20 level, but what the exact dollar amount is, I can either look up while you guys are speaking or get back to you on the exact amount.
Okay. And then my last question is around, I guess, additional COVID preparations that we might need. So whether I think you said we spent around 200,000 or 300,000 so far on PPE and with the leave and other support for staff. What do we have in the budget to prepare for potential needs in the coming year?
So that is an area that we have a cost recovery team that is it's a task force that has finance, DPW, and a retired Fire Marshal Tom Polera, who's come back to help us with this because he did our emergency reimbursements for the past 10 years or so. And so he knows how to do it. But we are assuming that all of our unbudgeted expenses on COVID-19 will be reimbursed by the Commonwealth of Virginia through the CARES 3, through other grant opportunities that we pursue, or through the old traditional way of putting in through the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. That is the assumption that's built into this budget.
So we don't have anything set aside for that, knowing that we think we can get it through the Fed?
That is correct. There are a couple of areas where departments, in trying to meet the budget guidance that I issued to make departmental budget cuts, and that's the 228,000 that's cuts that were made. There were some that we felt were too much in the realm of COVID-19 response, like cuts to safety equipment and things like that. So we did not accept those cuts, but we did not increase those budgets on the assumption that those are right up the alley of what's supposed to be reimbursed, and we should be reimbursed for them. The challenge is when. In the past, sometimes that money has come 24 months later, not helpful. I think this is going to be, particularly the CARES 3 money, which is already sitting in the coffers of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We expect that those disbursements will be quick. They should be in the current fiscal year. They're eligible for costs that are incurred all the way through December 31st, 2020. So we will continue to count our costs and put in for reimbursement all the way through that eligibility period.
And my last question is, I saw that our schools are only getting about 35 or 38,000 in terms of their share of the CARES funding. I think it was based on probably the LCI formula. Is that final, or is that something that is still up for negotiation?
That appears to be final, and it's very disappointing. It really goes, we've been lobbying pretty hard on this point that the old formulas are not the appropriate way to disperse CARES funds. And unfortunately, I think the Department of Education, the State Department of Education, chose to use those old formulas. I think they used the Title I formulas. But as a consequence, the city, our allocation is the second smallest in the state, and we don't think that's an accurate reflection of the damage that's being done right now.
Have we heard from the schools or superintendent on whether they have a plan on kind of managing within that then? Or should we expect them to come back to us for some help?
Well, I do know that they're aware of this number. I know that they're disappointed in it. I haven't had a detailed discussion. One thing that I think could be a better news will be the distribution of other elements of the CARES 3 funding to localities. I think some of the unofficial comments that we're getting, I think the formulas will be more on a per capita basis as opposed to some of the old other formulas. But that has not, we haven't heard anything officially about that.
Okay, that's it for mine.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there other questions or comments for Mr. Shields or Ms. Bawa?
Mr. Mayor, may I ask one?
Of course.
Wyatt, where does the a cost associated with administering the November election fall into your buckets there? Do you think that's COVID related enough that even though we might not get the money for 2 years, we might have to float whatever expense we would have to go to that might be billable to that account? Or is it just an expense that we're not going to be able to go to and we're just going to try to do the best we can with what we have? What's your reading on that?
Well, I think they should be covered by the COVID emergency funds. There are certain things that are going to be special about next fall's election that are directly COVID-19 related. And as you can read from the registrar's message also, I think he has very strong views on how the state could settle things to make it a lot easier for local registrars to administer the upcoming election by changing some of the rules with respect to mail-in balloting. But if the current rules are kept, every mail-in balloting is a big paperwork issue and very labor intensive. And every indication is that is the way that those rules will remain in effect. And so if we have 50-60% of our electorate voting by mail, that's a big labor effort, and he will need help to administer that. So we would like to use COVID funds for that. I will just say this: I recognize that we've got a bit of a budget problem with respect to the registrar. We held the registrar's budget flat. There was no increase for 2021 relative to 2020. So the issue that he raised to the council last year, we had solved that issue in the March 9th budget, but now it's back to where it was before, and it remains a problem. That's where we are right now.
All right, other questions or comments from Mr. Shields or Ms. Bawa?
Mr. Mayor, I have one question just regarding the CARES Act.
Sure.
And that is, I saw over the weekend that the town of Vienna has been granted $2 million from the CARES Act. Is that because they're part of Fairfax County and Fairfax gave them that piece? And Fairfax is getting money directly from the federal government, not through the state?
So that is my understanding. So here's the way that would work. Fairfax County got its money directly from Congress. It did not pass through the state. And the county has allocated slices of their dollars to Herndon and Vienna. But the way the allocation works is that Vienna still does need to submit for reimbursement for the use of those funds, is my current understanding. I might need to look a bit more into it. And the Treasury Department's rules still hold. It has to be an unbudgeted emergency expenditure directly related to the town's COVID-19 response. And it's done on a reimbursement basis. So it's an allocation to the town of Vienna, but it's not a check written to the town of Vienna, is my current understanding. But I say that because that's my understanding of the way that the rules are likely to be for all the jurisdictions that are going to get their money from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Okay, so the rules are the same as our rules. The money's coming from a different source.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there other questions or comments? All right, how about with respect to City Council's schedule or just general comments or questions or requests? Anything else?
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, a couple things. I wondered if we could have a legislative committee meeting to discuss where there may be an opportunity to ask our legislators to address some of these funding issues coming out of Richmond. It might be a good time to do that if we have enough issues. We are lucky that the majority leader of the Senate is our senator, and I know he has our best interests at heart. So I'm wondering, Cindy and Phil Duncan, if it might be appropriate in view of some of these funding issues and shortfalls out of Richmond that we maybe consider just a short legislative committee. Second point I wanted to make is Cindy and I have both been working overtime on transportation funding issues. A lot of it's unclear at this point, but we're plugging gaps and working hard to reduce our metro outlays. And it's late tonight. Maybe Cindy, you and I could put together a short summary for council so that you're aware we're doing everything we can outside of these regular meetings of the council to pursue our fiscal objectives in the transportation sector. I am interested in, and here I might call on our environmental community. Are there some things we ought to think about as we hopefully go through these phases of reopening that might both be economically efficient and also advance our environmental interests? There is that issue called climate change that hasn't gone away. And I suspect that as the economy recovers, the transport sector will again be contributing more in terms of air pollution than has been the case recently. So I'm just wondering about that. And then I do think we ought to hold the tax rate even, but I think we should look very hard within the budget to see what more we can do on the stormwater, the traffic calming, and I think Letty's point is helping our most disadvantaged citizens. So I think looking at options, looking at where it's not imprudent to put off some things, and at the same time address some of these commitments that we've made to our citizens in all three of those areas. So I look forward to further discussion on all these things. But I just wanted to make the point that we are working very, very hard. I know a number of council members are, especially the mayor and his work, to serve the city in ways that go far beyond these meetings. So thanks much. Appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much. As to your first point about getting together with our state representatives, that did occur fairly recently. The vice mayor, myself, and the city manager and Ms. Messner were on a call, or at two calls, and they were advised about the issue with the LCI and the fact that Falls Church and other localities here in Northern Virginia tend to get dramatically less funding as relates to use of certain formulas like the local composite index for school funding and other uses. And we can see the fruits of what happens when you do use that formula as relates to the very, very small amount of school funding that came out of the recent state allocation of only $38,000 to Falls Church. As I think you all know, I did recently send a letter into the Secretary of Finance, not only on behalf of Falls Church, but actually on behalf of the whole region, as part of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, asking that we use per capita means and formulas for calculation of additional funding and relief that may come to Northern Virginia, as opposed to the composite index and other formulas that are disadvantageous to folks here in the city. Anyway, with that, I'll go ahead and open up to other general comments or questions. Are there other things people want to say before we adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to take note that I saw that a demolition permit had been issued for the structure on the Fellows property. It's true, Mr. City Manager. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to take that as a yes from the city manager. My last discussion, I don't know if he's on mute right now, but our last discussion, I think he had indicated it was imminent. I don't know if he's available now or not, but I think that's probably accurate.
Hey, Phil, if Wyatt's not there, as the Rec and Parks Liaison, we got a note from Danny that said within the next week, we get things scheduled. We should expect the Fellows property to get demolished. And I think because they were originally planning kind of a large master planning discussions with the community, and obviously we can't have large gatherings for now, they were going to follow up with kind of surveys and written letters to the neighborhood.
Great, thank you.
All right, are there other questions, comments?
I have 2 comments. One is that I think one of the big nonprofits in the City of Falls Church is Homestretch, and they have their annual fundraising breakfast this week. So I would encourage people in the community to support that. Usually they have a really large event with great support from the community, and they raise a substantial part of their funding for the year. So I think that is available online as a way to support Homestretch. That's one. And then if you've been driving around Falls Church today, you may have seen the sign celebrating the class of 2020 from George Mason High School. And the amazing volunteers from the all-night grad committee were out really early this morning putting out all those signs for graduates, and I think that was really special to a lot of kids. And they also had these signs, I'm going to hold it up, for the rest of the community, printed at Welsh's Printing. So if anybody would like a sign that says we support the class of 2020, just let me know or let the all-night grad committee know, and they will deliver one, and you can put it in your store window, your home window, your office window, or on your front porch to support the class of 2020.
All right, thank you, Vice Mayor. Other questions, comments, requests before we adjourn?
Sorry, one last budget request. Kieran, if you're still on, in the next round of Q&A, could you put in what the average tax bill increase is going to be for the average homeowner?
Sure, we'll do that. There is no change to it, but we'll include that, yeah.
Well, there will be with assessment increases.
Haven't gone up.
Yeah, we'll put that in the next Q&A.
Yeah, we'll include that.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or comments?
Oh, sorry, I meant no increase since the March proposed that we gave to you. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but.
All right, any other questions or comments or requests before we adjourn? All right, well, thank you all for joining us tonight electronically. Everyone stay safe and healthy, and we'll pull through this together. Thank you all.